$100 a month. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? Yield to my friend.
Thank you, Representative Ryan, and thank you for expressing the tone of harshness that has prevailed in this chamber. I don't know if I can remember when a standing law in this country was used as a reason to avoid paying our bills or keeping government running. I find it regrettable that we go after the law of the land, in this case the Affordable Care Act. They'll reference it as Obamacare, and we'll see how long that label stands when the program proves successful. It might be removed immediately. But nonetheless, the harshness here is after a season's worth of activity on the Affordable Care Act. We have voted for it in both houses of the Congress, bipartisan support in the Senate. President stood for re-election, was re-elected, in immense arguments and debates about repeal and replace by the opposition, by the candidate for president from the other major party. So the people have spoken, and when they elected members to the House of Representatives, the cumulative total of votes for the members of this House were in the majority column for Democrats. So the people have stated they support this. And as Senator McCain indicated on the floor just this week, there are consequences to elections. It's not sinking in, or perhaps it has, but they refuse to allow their behavior to end. It's putting themselves first as political forces rather than the people, what's in the best interest of the people. And I'm concerned, I'm convinced that this is driven by the fear that this Obamacare, as they call it, will be successful. And this is their last effort possible to end the opportunity to provide affordable, accessible, quality health care for all. We know it. We see it in our states. We see it in Ohio. We see it in California. We see it in Florida. We're joined by our friend from Texas who just visited my district this week in Albany, New York, Representative Castro from Texas. We see it in our home states. People have a need out there. In my case, I can cite some of the stats. 36,000 young people will not be biased against with pre-existing conditions from having insurance. Take it away, why don't you? Take it away and then put us at risk of defaulting with our credit rating. Take it away. Be harsh. We look at the 12,000 plus seniors who are receiving discounts for their pharmaceutical needs. Take it away, why don't you? It's unfair, it's un-American, immoral to take it away. But we're going to use it as a pawn in a device here called negotiating on whether or not the government will continue to run, whether we keep the doors open and the lights on, whether or not we're going to pay our bills. Come on, working families in this country understand it. They roll up their sleeves, they play by the rules, they work hard, they expect to taste success, and they pay their bills on time, and they expect their government to do likewise. They don't expect us to put a roadblock in the way that says the law of the land, constitutionally tested in the highest court of the land, in the Supreme Court, given the green light, we're going to put that in the road as a roadblock to stop progress because we know the October 1st starting date is quickly arriving. This is grossly unfair to the people of this country. When I look at the 124,000 seniors who are receiving free preventative services, I'm not ready to give that up. Repeal's not an answer. Improving is an answer, and I'll work with you. But we don't use this vehicle as a reason to stop government from running, or a vehicle to stop us from paying America's bills. It goes on and on. 6,200 young people who now qualify to stay on their parents' policies for their health care coverage. This is vast improvement. This is allowing people, the tens of millions who have been uninsured, the many who are underinsured, to finally have access, connection to a system. Aren't we in this business to respond to the needs of people? Are we in the business to take the facts, twist them, present them in a way that offer confusion and only serve political partisan purposes? I think we can do better than that in this chamber. We're going to work. We're going to get to that finish line. And I'm convinced, Representative Garamendi, that we're going to stand for justice, what's for fairness in our society. And health care is a right. We should see it as an American right The moral compass points in that direction, and we ought not use it as a pawn in a political theater that allows for us to not have government funded or allows for us to not pay our bills. Let's get on with business. What's happening in this chamber? Are we so insensitive to the needs of people? What could be more important than responding to the health care needs of the people of this great country? So let's stop the brinksmanship. Let's get it done. Let's get business done here. And I thank you for leading us in this discussion and
Mr. Tonko,
having served with all of our colleagues here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tonko. In previous weeks, you and I and Mr. Ryan and Mr. Castro have had the pleasure of talking on this floor about putting people to work, about jobs, about creating the infrastructure, the education, the training that's necessary to move Americans. But this week we find ourselves caught up in this leveraging the necessity of funding government and paying our bills, the debt limit, using that as a lever to destroy a very important law that provides benefits, real benefits to every American. Mr. Castro, we thank you for joining us. We know that Texas was much discussed in the previous hour. Sure. I'm sure that you have some thoughts about all of this, and so please join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Garamendi, and thank you, Congressman Tonko and Congressman Ryan, for your very eloquent words in describing the situation that we face today. I, like millions of Americans, hope that there will not be a government shutdown. I hope that we can get past the hostage politics that have prevailed over this place over the last few years. This is no way to run a government. Our nation is the strongest nation on earth. We are the most exceptional nation on earth. And these wounds are self-inflicted ones. I've said many times, and I've heard from my constituents, that all of these fiscal fights, these self-inflicted wounds by Congress, when we get up to the limit where we're supposed to pass a budget or we're supposed to raise the debt ceiling limit, all of these fights are causing the nation high blood pressure. They're affecting the market in negative ways. The stock market is taking a hit. Our employment rates are taking a hit. In every way, this has been bad for the country. And I would also remind our members of Congress and the American people about what happened the last time brinksmanship was tried. The last time this happened, the sequester resulted. A bad way to do business. I think people on both sides of the aisle would agree that the sequester did not turn out well for our nation. Well, that's the same road we're headed down again. The Republicans are taking us down the same road that gave us the sequester, the Budget Control Act, and then the cuts that really were across the board, were not targeted, have hurt the military, have hurt education, have hurt health care, and we're headed down the same road. You know, and Congressman, last time you and I spoke, I guess about a month ago here on the floor, I mentioned that, you know, in politics you're often asked, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, what is it that you stand for? And I think as Democrats, what we believe in is that there are a few things that have made this nation great. First is freedom, because we are a free people. That freedom has been hard fought for. I come from San Antonio, Texas, military city, USA. So the people of San Antonio and the people of Texas know the high price of freedom. The second is democracy. We are a democratic nation. Because we are free, we get to elect our leaders, and we get to kick them out of office when we no longer believe that they're representing our views and our values. But much of the politics of today is really fought over the third principle and value, which is opportunity. You see, what is special about this country, and the reason that for years and years people from all over the world have wanted to come to America, is because as Americans, we have come together to build out what I call an infrastructure of opportunity that enables each of us to pursue our American dreams. And I want to remind you what I mean by that. Just as there's an infrastructure of transportation, a system of streets and roads and highways that helps all of us get to where we want to go on the road, in American society, we have built up together an infrastructure of opportunity that enables each of us, or at least helps us, get to where we want to go in life. And that has to include certain things that are at risk when we get into hostage politics. Great public schools and universities, a strong health care system so that if you get sick, you don't become debilitated or die, and then an economy that's built around well-paying jobs so that people can support themselves and their family members. It's that second part that I mentioned, health care, that it has been an issue in this debate. And I just want to close by saying this. The senator from Texas, the junior senator from Texas, a few days ago, talked about how he was speaking for 26 million Texans when he was threatening to shut down the government over the Affordable Care Act, which he derisively calls Obamacare. He does not speak for 26 million Texans. The fact is, Texas has the highest percentage of people who have no health care coverage at all. There are a lot of families who are having to take their kids to the emergency room, who are getting letters from their insurance companies because they've hit their lifetime cap. They're getting letters being denied coverage because they have a pre-existing condition. The Affordable Care Act is going to change that. It's going to be a good thing for our state. And so I would just note that there are a lot of people in Texas who are excited about the Affordable Care Act and the fact that they are going to have a chance to afford to have insurance, some of them for the first time in their lives. And even those who have insurance, many of them will no longer have to worry about being denied because of pre-existing condition, about hitting a lifetime cap, or about going bankrupt because of health care. So with that, Congressman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Castro, and thank you for pointing out that one junior senator doesn't represent all of Texas, but I know you represent the heart of Texas.
Thank you.
That is the people of Texas. We're joined here by our distinguished senior member from the state of New Jersey. Please, thank you for that. But before you begin, may I inquire how much time we have?
9 minutes remaining.
Very good. Please.
Thank you. I just want to thank the gentleman from California and all my colleagues who came to the floor in the aftermath of that hour from the GOP side, basically criticizing on the Republican side the health care reform, the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. You know, sometimes when I listen to what the Republicans say about Obamacare, I'm shocked because I don't think they understand how many people are out there who've already benefited from it and who are really looking forward to October 1st because they can sign up for the first time for health insurance. And let me tell you, in my own district, I've had so many inquiries from people who are uninsured or underinsured or who can't afford the health insurance they have now. And I just want to say, you know, I agree with the gentleman from California that this was basically resolved last November. It couldn't have been clearer that the president, for whom Obamacare is known now, was out there in the presidential election saying that the Affordable Care Act was a great accomplishment on his part and he was going to continue with it. And then you had Mitt Romney on the other side saying that if he was elected that he was going to repeal it. And so my colleague from California is right. That was resolved in the election. So why is it that our colleagues on the Republican side are trying to hold the health care reform hostage and saying that if we don't repeal it or delay it or defund it or whatever, we've had so many votes on this, over 40 now, that they're going to shut the government down. One has nothing to do with the other. You know, I just want to talk about those three groups of people who were most positively impacted by Obamacare beginning October 1st. First of all, we know we have about 40 million Americans who are uninsured. Many of them are from New Jersey. They don't have health insurance options right now. This is going to be the first time, October 1st, that they actually have a rational, legitimate option to get health insurance. And they are waiting for October 1st to come around. Secondly, we have just as many people, maybe 80 million people, who may have health insurance, but it's very skeletal, doesn't provide much in the way of benefits, and they have to pay a lot of money out of pocket if they get sick or they have to go to the hospital or whatever. Those people also will benefit because every health insurance policy that's offered under the health exchange that the gentleman from California talked about will be a good benefit package, at least as good as what we know now as, say, Blue Cross Blue Shield. And then you have the third group of people who may have health insurance, but they're spending so much of it in order to make sure that they have health insurance are spending so much money that they can't pay for their rent, or they can't pay for their mortgage, or they can't put food on the table. All these people are going to benefit come October 1st when they can sign up for a good package and an affordable package. And one of the main reasons it's affordable is because the federal government is helping pay the premium, helping subsidize the premium with tax credits, but not tax credits that you have to pay up front and then you get a refund when you file next April 15th, but a tax credit like a subsidy that goes directly to pay for the premium. And we're all already hearing, you know, I've said this to my colleagues in New Jersey now, they're saying that the average health insurance policy is going to be about $350 a month. That may not seem like, you know, some people say $350 a month. That is incredibly affordable for a lot of people in New Jersey who are paying a lot more right now. And that's without the subsidy. With the subsidy, that can go down to $100 a month, depending upon your income. So I can't stress enough how important this is. And for the Republicans to try to hold this hostage, no one on our side of the aisle is going to give up on the Affordable Care Act, because we know people need it. And we are going to move forward, and hopefully they come to their senses and don't keep trying to shut this government down. I want to commend the gentleman again. Thank you.
Mr. Pallone, thank you so very much for your comments about New Jersey. Mr. Ryan, I think we have about 2 minutes, maybe 2.5 minutes left. If you'd like to close, and then I'll take the last 30 seconds and we'll thank the public for their attention.
Yeah, no, I think the last couple of points that I'd like to make, again, we have very conservative Republican Tea Party governors saying we want to expand Medicaid, and they make all of the same arguments that we made during the health care debate. Coming into an emergency room and getting your primary care does not make any sense. You get sicker, it costs more money. There's also a moral aspect that we've got millions and millions of people going bankrupt, children not getting treatment, hitting the ceiling when they have cancer, some other issue. Those problems have been fixed. And so to those folks here in the House of Representatives, need to recognize just how extreme their position is. When Karl Rove and John McCain and some of these other folks are saying, you folks are really out on a limb here, you're not making a lot of sense. That's not Tim Ryan and Mr. Garamendi and Mr. Pallone and others who they would call liberals. That's Karl Rove, Bush's brain, is telling you you're way out on a limb on this one. And it doesn't make any sense. And I think that's important. You have Republican Tea Party governors making the same argument about expanding Medicaid. Critical, critical points. Lastly, as we see the top 1% and the top 1/10 of 1% garnering almost a third of the wealth created from 09 to 12, we've got a problem in this country. And so if we can't step in and say at the very least we can give some of these folks some basic health care, then we got to ask ourselves what kind of country do we really want to live in. And I yield back to my friend.
Mr. Ryan and Mr. Pallone, thank you so very much for joining us on this discussion about the Affordable Health Care Act and the way in which the Republican Party here in the House is using it as its repeal as a lever to really shut down government. It's not a good situation. We normally spend our time here on the floor talking about jobs, infrastructure, how we can move this economy and this nation forward. We hope to get back to that next week. We've got a critical vote coming in the next couple of days, or tomorrow or the next day, about really the health care of America and, more importantly, about the way in which this government should operate. Mr. Speaker, with that, we yield back our time.
The gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd heard our President on television saying in a speech that I heard this morning, in essence, people who watch Fox News think Obamacare is terrible. There are all kinds of problems. And I sure hope that our president will start watching something besides CNN or MSNBC so he can find out that everything he's done is not made of gold, that people are hurting across America. They heard him when the president promised, if you like your insurance, you'll get to keep it. He said it over and over and over and over. If you like your insurance, you can keep it. Made that speech across the nation over and over. He said, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Well, it turns out that wasn't true. If you like your insurance, you're probably going to lose it or it's going to cost a whole lot more. And that's what people are finding across the country. So I appreciate my colleagues talking about and actually saying some of the same things about Obamacare that they said 3.5 years ago. The trouble is now Obamacare is upon us, and people are being hurt, and they've lost their insurance. They've lost their doctor. They can't afford the extra thousands of dollars it is costing. I think it was PolitiFact that took a shot at me for accurately saying it would cost people thousands of dollars if they were at 133% of the poverty level. They'd have to buy the insurance or pay the extra income tax. And when you get down to it, even their article that criticized me pointed out at the end that it's still, with all the government subsidies, it was still going to cost a few $1,000s, that was the estimate. It's costing people money they don't have. They're getting less care, not more. And I don't have to just give opinion on that. We've got case after case, email after email from real Americans that have seen the harm it's done. My young friend that I have tremendous respect for across the aisle had pointed out that, you know, apparently from his limited experience, he said that Congress has worked in a very partisan way the last few years. What he doesn't realize is that in the 4 years the Democrats controlled the House, they presided over the Congress that had more closed bills. That meant they didn't allow a single amendment. They ostracized nearly half of the country from being represented because they did not allow a single amendment to more bills than any other Congress in the history of our country. It was the most ruthless, partisan, overreaching Congress in the history of the country. It was unbelievable. So it gets a little difficult to hear Republican leaders who were in charge during the 4 most oppressive partisan years when it comes to having input from the other side tell us about responsibility and bipartisanship when they showed what they think when they got in charge. It was really quite mean. We were told by our colleague earlier, Republicans gave us sequester, and just encourage my friends across the aisle to go back and look at accurate history. It was the president that proposed sequester. I didn't think it was a good idea at all. That's no way to really legislate. We should have made the difficult choices and made the cuts. And then to hear comments about the Democrats believe freedom has made us great, I absolutely do too. But freedom has a price. Freedom requires responsibility from Americans. It requires that everybody be involved, that everybody pay attention to what the government was doing. So those who said for so long, I don't care what the government does as long as they stay out of my business, if that's your approach, the government does not, will not stay out of your business. It gets to where we are right now with Obamacare. Every American's most private secrets about their own personal private health will be kept by the federal bureaucracy here headquartered in Washington. The records may be kept elsewhere. I think the administration made a deal with GE, so GE and the federal government will have everyone's most personal secrets. It's a good thing they can keep a secret in the federal government, so surely nobody's personal records will be leaked out once they get to the possession of GE or the federal government. But for my friends across the aisle to talk about hostage politics, all I know is that people that I talk to across my district, like in the I think lowest denominator probably ended up around 500 to 4, that gave examples or talked about how bad Obamacare was. And you'd have a few people that said, well, actually, we got our 26-year-old on our health insurance, so it's not so bad. Gee, and the Republicans were ready to agree to that. We were ready to do bipartisan bills, but the most closed-minded and closed Congress in our history would not allow input. They didn't want our input. They were going to do it all themselves, and as a result of that kind of mean-spiritedness, Americans are suffering today. So I have my friend from Texas, also a former state district judge, and as I understand, he's heard from his constituents as well, and I would yield such time as he may consume to my friend from Texas.
Appreciate the gentleman yielding some time. Earlier this morning, I was reading some emails and Facebook posts on my Facebook from people with the question that I asked, how does Obamacare affect you? We ran out of time earlier this morning. Unlike the Senate, we can't talk until we're through talking, as you know. So I'm going to read a few more of those in the next few minutes from some of these folks that I received comments from in my district and people on Facebook this morning. Tanya told me that my family's insurance premiums have tripled since Obamacare was signed into law. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep it. Pam says the huge chemical plant my husband works for has made changes to his benefits package, which includes higher deductibles, co-pays, and some loss of prescription drug benefits, all done in the anticipation and implementation of Health Care Act. He works hard. I'm a public school teacher. We want to send our daughter to her dream school upon graduation, the University of Texas, Mr. Gohmert. I know we may have a disagreement on that. But anyway, they want to send their daughter to the University of Texas. And she says, more coming out of our pockets for health insurance means less available for college. Please help. Shannon says, because of Obamacare, premiums have doubled, all co-pays went up, so I had to change employers because of the law. Brandy, I am a finance manager for a nonprofit company with 16 employees. We may not be able to offer health insurance next year. Linda, who I went to high school with, said, I'm feeling the pain of Obamacare today. My doctor's office told me this morning that my insurance company will no longer cover a procedure for my knee that they have covered in the past. I will now have to pay $1,080 out of pocket. Asked if this was a result of Obamacare, she replied in the positive. Also, TRICARE won't cover it, and my doctor dropped Medicare coverage. Her last comment was expensive. Matthew says, I'm an outlaw now. I'm a subcontractor, and I just can't afford Obamacare. Kristen, if I could afford insurance, I'd already have it. This forces me to buy something I still cannot afford. Jen says this, the deductible went up, copay went up, I have thyroid problems and have to have it tested 1 to 2 times a year. The insurance always covered this test. It no longer covers it. I'm still trying to figure out the affordable part of the health care when my costs keep getting higher. Christy, here's what she says about her family business. Our family business has had a 47% increase in cost to the company since Obamacare was passed. We're going to have to cut somewhere. David, I'm a Texas citizen, U.S. citizen, living in Bahrain. I reside in Bahrain. My employer provides my insurance in Bahrain. But I'm told I have to buy a U.S. policy or face the penalty. And Teddy, and this will be the last one, presents a rough situation for people he cares about. My fiancée went from 40 hours a week to 27 hours because her employer said they had to in order to avoid penalties from Obamacare. My sister has been told that her test and some medicines for her MS will not be covered because Obamacare mandates say she is no longer going to be a viable person at the age of 50. Now, these are real people. These are real people who've contacted me today about the effects of Obamacare. Contrary to what the folks on the other side have said for the last hour, it's not all great for a lot of Americans. It's a tough piece of legislation. It affects people's health and affects them financially. And this law turns over America's health to the federal government. There's got to be a better way. I appreciate the gentleman from Tyler yielding me some time, and I'll yield back.
Thank you. Reclaiming my time, real people being hurt in real ways is what Obamacare is doing. And for those who think it is a good thing, those were people that would have been helped by either side of the aisle. But it should be noted that insurance companies under Obamacare are paying an additional tax to the federal government. Everybody's having to pay more for everything, and yet they're getting less health care. I get questions, why under Obamacare are we now going to see everything we've already gotten notice? It's so much more expensive, and yet we're getting less covered, less health care, higher deductibles, those kind of things. And part of that answer is, well, we've got to pay for the 18,000 or so IRS agents who are going to be hired to help you with your health care or your health insurance so they can monitor more closely what you make and what you spend it on and whether you're spending enough on health care and how you're spending it. But we got to pay for all the IRS agents. Now, that's not going to help anybody's health. But then you also look at all the navigators that are being hired, and that's a problem. And I saw over $1 billion was about to be spent on advertising to tell Americans how good they were going to feel under Obamacare. All of those things end up coming out of the coverage and the health care that people would otherwise get. And I see my friend from Pennsylvania had arrived and didn't know if he wished to be recognized. I'd be glad to recognize him, Mr. Perry, for such time as he may consume.
Absolutely. And I'd like to thank the gentleman from Tyler, Texas, for yielding me the time. And I would just like to talk about what many Americans hear about talked in Congress but maybe can't put a face or a name to, and that is access to care. What does that mean, access to care? And that our claim is that Obamacare reduces access to care. Access to care is your ability to have a doctor take care of you or some kind of practitioner take care of whatever your health care need is. And I think it's important that we show an example or examples of that. And so right now, on January 1st, thousands of Americans are at risk of losing their life-saving dialysis treatment, which they need to survive. We're not talking about, I need to have my bunions reconfigured. We're not talking about I got a skin tag or I have an upset stomach. We're talking about dialysis that people that are on dialysis must have it on a regular basis to live. Now, I visited a dialysis clinic, 25 machines that operate 6 days a week in the 4th Congressional District, Mr. Speaker. 6 days a week, 25 machines, all day long, people coming in, and it serves primarily the underprivileged population of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is the capital. That's its primary clientele. And the gal there that was running the place told me that on January 1st, if Obamacare continues to go through, they will cut their operating hours from 6 days to 3. 3 days a week from 6. So those 25 machines will be idle half the time that they're currently being used. That's 50%. Now, Medicare payments already fall very short of covering the entire cost of this, but This clinic makes up the difference by the other paying customers. And I would ask the folks that support Obamacare, do they really think that the rich in this nation are going to go without access to care? We've heard about concierge medicine. The rich are going to continue to receive care one way or another. But it's the poor. It's really the abject poor that are going to suffer under this. And I just want to put some names to this. I met a Vietnam veteran named Johnny. You know, people think, oh, you have dialysis, you've got diabetes, you didn't take care of yourself. This man is fit, doesn't smoke, and does take care of himself, but he just happens to have diabetes. And he comes into this clinic, and he needs to come in more than once a week. So when you go from 6 days to 3 days, Johnny is going to have to look for some other way to get his dialysis. And then there's Amy. Amy comes in a couple times a week and hooks herself up. I mean, she comes and she knows it so well that the people there that are actually administering the service and the care don't have to do that work for her. She comes in and she takes care of that herself. So she can literally stay alive. And then there's Chris, 34. People think, oh, you need dialysis, you didn't take care of yourself, you're an old person who didn't take care of himself. 34 years old. Chris, you know, when you go to dialysis, I need to tell people that it's 4 or 5 hours sometimes and more in the chair. That's a day, away from work, away from family. And it's hard to sustain employment when you're gone 4 or 5 hours a day, 2 or 3 times a week to stay alive. But that's what these people must do. Chris supports himself. He's a chef in a local restaurant. And he's got type 1. He's had kidney failure. So he's going to have to find another place to get his dialysis, some other place, because this place will no longer be there. So that's what access to care means, and that's putting a face and a name to it, and that's what Obamacare is going to do in the community that I represent, literally taking this life-saving care away from people. And so I would urge my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, to really take a look at the upcoming votes, both in the Senate and the House, regarding this bill, regarding this law. It is not ready to roll out. There are significant failures of it and shortcomings. We understand it was laudable that trying to find a way for every American to receive care, that is a laudable goal, and we support that. We have a plan here in the House of Representatives. We would like the plan to be aired, but none of that's going to happen. None of that's going to happen if Obamacare is fully implemented as is planned for in the upcoming days. None of that's going to happen, and these people that are receiving their dialysis on the West Shore in the 4th District of Pennsylvania are going to have to find some other way, literally day by day, to stay alive, thanks to Obamacare. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you. I'll reclaim my time. Here's, the gentleman is absolutely correct, but it's not just Pennsylvania, and it's not just Texas. It's everywhere. People are hurting. My friends across the aisle in the last hour had commented about Republicans wanting a shutdown. We don't want a shutdown. We don't. Ted Cruz does not want a shutdown. Visited with him quite a bit yesterday. He doesn't want to shut down, but we know the damage Obamacare is doing, not just to the economy, that's bad enough, but to people's health. I've got... here's an email, and we've got so many of them just in the short time I have trying to decide which ones to provide. This one from Katie says, I just got notice my health care coverage options and costs will be changed. They will send out the info next month. I'm one of the 26,000 part-time Home Depot employees whose hours were cut back to never exceed 29 per week. We used to do the 6-week thing. They would schedule us for 35 to 39 hours per week for 5 weeks, then cut us back in the 6th week to 25, and so then back up again. Now it's always going to be less than 29 hours per week. I'm scared to death to see what the rate changes will be. Probably way more than I make, but my doctor of 9 years is retiring this month. She is only 46, an amazingly exceptional family practice practitioner. Says she'll grow a garden and herd goats, but she won't be a contributing member of the insanity. She is an Indian Hindu, born and raised in Canada. She came to Texas because of the messed up state-run medical care in Canada. So insurance, not the same. Losing the doctor. Here's one from Sandra. My wife has a bone disease and is always in severe pain. We see a specialist in Longview, Texas. This specialist travels from Dallas, 110 miles away, and practices here a couple of days a week. But since Obamacare, he has said he can no longer afford to have two practices so far apart, and will have to close his Longview practice, and he may just retire early. Now there will soon be no doctor in this area for my wife to see, and she is too debilitated to make the drive to Dallas every month. We're not sure what to do. These are real Americans agonizing over the damage that Obamacare is doing. And I can't bring myself to call it the Affordable Care Act because it isn't. Here's one from a widow that lives in East Texas, Joy. She says, I'm losing my insurance, which I've had for over 30 years. So obviously so much for if you like your insurance, you can keep it. There's no telling how many millions of times that promise will be broken in the subsequent months if we can't put off the damage Obamacare is doing. Back to her letter, it says, it was in my husband's name, talking about the insurance, and he has recently died, so here I am a widow and losing my insurance. I'm frustrated and scared. I've never had to do anything like research for insurance and don't even know where to begin. I'm from Tyler and saw your post on Facebook. Enclosed is a letter my insurance company sent me. They do not directly say it's due to Obamacare, but it's pretty easy to read between the lines. And actually, you don't even have to do much reading between the lines. Copy of the letter from New York Life Insurance. At the end of the first paragraph, it says that their insurance, their group health and life insurance trust, will terminate at midnight on December 31st, 2013. It says the decision to exit this market was not an easy one. The determination was made based on the evolving market conditions and regulatory requirements stemming from the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. I think that's pretty clear. She lost her insurance because of Obamacare. I know that there's nobody on the Democratic side that really wants to do this, put this kind of fear and suffering into a dear widow. But it's being done. I know that nobody voted on this side of the aisle for Obamacare intending to hurt widows and children like is happening. But it's happening, and now that it's happening, it is absolutely incorrigible if my friends do not help us help those that are being hurt by at least postponing this disastrous, hurtful Obamacare. Here's another. On Tuesday of last week, my 89-year-old mother-in-law fell and broke her hip. Her doctor gave her only 50% chance of survival, but survive she did. He stated that after the operation that she was lucky it happened this week. He said, in 2 weeks, I could not have performed the same procedure, but it's because it is not approved procedure under the new rules. It's too expensive. And this individual, Jay, writes, we all wondered what her chances of survival would have been under Obamacare. Oh, she'll have insurance, but we're already hearing from people that they've been told they better get the procedure now because if they wait, it's not going to be covered because the Obamacare board apparently thinks if you're of a certain age, then maybe you don't need or deserve a pacemaker or back surgery. Here's another that's from an employer, or not an employer, but I work for a commercial electrical contractor who's been in business in East Texas for over 30 years. At the beginning of this year, we employed over 100 workers. The company provides group health insurance and pays 75% of the cost for the employees. At this time, we have 66 employees. We will intentionally have less than 50 employees by the end of the year, and the owner is planning to drop the health plan at the first of the coming year. So much for if you like your insurance, you can keep it. Not only you're not going to keep your insurance, you're not keeping your employment. Here's another from Bobby. With the health mandate looming, his college, where he teaches, determined that adjunct professors could no longer teach 4 classes per semester because the time for prep teaching would require them provide health insurance. So he has been dropped from class maximum to 3. He said, I didn't expect the health insurance from college, but the mandate has now dictated my workload. It dictated less work. So how does he make it? Here's one. I'm a 56-year-old single woman with no children, and I've been stuck as part of a time toll collector for Harris County since the passage of Obamacare. For nearly 4 years, I only work 72 hours every 2 weeks with no benefits whatsoever. Last year, the county commissioner stated they will no longer hire full-time employees. I have $39 left for groceries. Once mortgage payment and bills are paid, Obamacare will destroy me. Here's another from Charles. I recently applied for a job in Tyler at a new restaurant. At my interview, I asked how many hours I could expect. The owner said verbatim, I'm sorry, but because of Obamacare, I cannot afford to hire anyone for more than 30 hours per week. Here's another from Timothy. I am the only one that works in my house. I support a family of 5 and would be considered lower middle class. I just received notice from my employer that I now have to pay an additional $6 per person per month as a surcharge on the new health care law. Also, my premium is going up $60 per month. It's a total of $100 per month, increase of about $1,200 per year. I'm basically looking at a 34% increase for nothing. I don't know how I'm going to be able to afford this as my budget is pretty tight already. Repeal the Affordable Health Care Act, please, because for me it's anything but affordable. Here's another from Rose. I'm 54 years old and have always had health insurance, which I pay for myself. I, too, received a letter telling me that due to this so-called affordable health care, they will not be providing me with continued insurance. I will need to make decisions about what insurance I want, but they have no idea what choices I will have and, of course, no idea what I will be charged, but we're quick to say it will likely be more than I pay now. Thanks a lot, Obamacare. She said, we have no extra income to pay for this. Please stop this from happening to our family and families throughout our country who are having their rights taken away from us. Here's one from Andrea. She sells insurance for State Farm. They partner with Assurant Health for our individual medical plans. Ever since we were forced this monstrosity in the most partisan vote ever, we have seen major changes come from the health insurance policies we were able to offer. Not only is there a noticeable increase in the price, we no longer offer maternity coverage. We no longer offer prescription copay. We no longer offer an office copay. We no longer offer the low deductibles we once did. We have lost many of the networks that allowed people in our area the best choice as their doctor being in network. Now the premium increases at the renewal are much higher than pre-reforms. Here's another from Melissa. I am self-employed and I'm already paying for my own health insurance. I received a letter from my insurance provider 3 weeks ago that stated there would be changes in my policy and they would be sending me additional information in the coming months. Based on the estimates I've seen, my monthly insurance costs will go up roughly 136%. Obamacare is damaging real Americans. we owe it to them to do everything we can to stop it and stop the waivers and exemptions. That I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair lays before the House an enrolled bill.
H.R. 1412, an act to amend Title 38 United States Code to extend certain expiring authorities affecting veterans and their families and for other purposes.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege and honor to be recognized to address you here on the floor of the United States House of Representatives, especially at this time as the House and the Senate hurtle towards some type of perhaps collision and sometimes or perhaps a conclusion to the drama that's taking place over the funding of our government. And it seems as though the focus of all this comes down on Obamacare. But I'd like to first, Mr. Speaker, paint the picture on how we got here. And it's this. The House has consistently passed a budget. And then the House passed legislation that essentially required the Senate to finally, after over 1,000 days, pass a budget over there themselves. Of course it was a token, and of course it was pushed off to the side, and of course it wasn't something that could be reconciled with a responsible, legitimate budget here in the House of Representatives, but it met the criterion narrowly. And so the functionality of this Congress, which has been in the past 12 or so appropriations bills passing here, starting here, being messaged over to the Senate, where when things worked right, the Senate picked up those appropriations bills and through their appropriations process, their hearings, their deliberation, their subcommittee and their committee process, worked their will with the House bill that had been messaged to them, and one at a time, 12 or 13 appropriation bills would work their way so that they had passed the House in one form and generally the Senate in a different form, in which case a conference committee would be appointed, and House Republicans and Democrats would sit down with Senate Republicans and Democrats, hammer out the differences in one of 12 or 13 appropriation bills, and come to an agreement, send the conference report to the House or the Senate for passage, in which case it would pass both, be messaged to the President. That appropriation then would be concluded and fulfilled. And a responsible government starts with hearing from our constituents, usually in December, November, December, and January. And as we look forward to the end of the fiscal year, which happens next Monday night at midnight, we are working towards getting all of our government funded appropriately. And in those months of January, it starts up, and then in February and March, the intensity of hearing from constituents and their budgetary concerns, the appropriations hearings in the Appropriation Committee, and then here on the floor under an open rule, bill after bill after bill, a dozen appropriation bills are debated, and the open rule that allows amendments to be brought forward on that to adjust the appropriations up or down and perhaps transfer some of those appropriations. The House works its will, the Senate works its will. We come together and agree on a conference report. We send it to the President signs it, and those departments of government that are funded by that appropriation bill then are given their budgetary responsibility and their spending authority for the upcoming fiscal year. That's how it has worked in the past. It does not work that way under this dysfunctional setup that exists today. What happens now in this Congress that we have, Mr. Speaker, is this. The House debates the appropriations bills, 12 of them or so. We've passed several of them at this point in the House. We've sent them over to the Senate. They go message to the Senate, where they arrive at the Majority Leader Harry Reid's desk. And figuratively speaking, Harry Reid then puts that appropriation bill in his desk drawer and closes the drawer, not to be discussed or heard from again for the balance of the fiscal year. And another appropriation bill goes over, and another, and another, and another. And what you see happen is, we've seen this happen in the past where we have passed, I remember under Chairman Jerry Lewis, the appropriations chair at the time, all of our appropriation bills by July. Messaged them all over to the Senate, where they all would go into Harry Reid's desk drawer. And at the end of the fiscal year, sometime about now, or maybe a week ahead of this time, Harry Reid would look around and think, oh, hey, we're facing a government shutdown. if I don't get those bills out of my desk drawer. And so he pulls out a dozen appropriations bills. Each one of them is a collective judgment of the majority of the United States House of Representatives, constitutionally messaged to the Senate, stacks them up, and takes his little marker through there, and he draws a line through the appropriations that he doesn't like, and he writes in all the line items and puts on all the Christmas tree spending that he does like, and he puts in the wish list of the senators that he wants to help out, so to speak, and some are Republicans and many are Democrats, and he creates this omnibus spending bill. Sometimes we call it omnibus if it doesn't show up at the end of the year. Otherwise, if it's at the expiration of our spending, of our appropriations, as it is now, we call it a continuing resolution. We've been operating on continuing resolutions for too long. And it isn't because of Obamacare necessarily that we're at this point today. The leverage has been created because Harry Reid didn't deal with our appropriations bills. And furthermore, he's not going to deal with our appropriations bills. He is going to create this crisis so that it increases the leverage that he has in defeating the will of the people, which is to shut off all the funding to implement or enforce Obamacare, Mr. Speaker, to put an end to its implementation, to not let Obamacare become implemented because, first of all, I don't agree with the decision made by the Supreme Court. I think it's completely inconsistent to declare a bill to be a tax as it arrives at the United States Supreme Court, to declare it not to be a tax as it arrives at the Supreme Court for the purposes of considering the issue of the litigation on Obamacare, but then to declare it to be a tax as a decision of the Supreme Court. It can be one or the other. Either Obamacare is a tax or it's not a tax, but it can't be conveniently not a tax for the purposes of whether the Supreme Court would grant cert, and then conveniently a tax for the purposes of declaring that it is constitutional. But that's the decisions that were made by the United States Supreme Court. All of us take an oath to uphold the Constitution, everyone in the House and the Senate, and of course the Supreme Court as well. And we can't be taking an oath to uphold a decision that no one that I know of in America predicted. You would think, Mr. Speaker, that of all the constitutional scholars we have that had been writing and reading and thinking and analyzing Obamacare, that had watched as, by legislative shenanigan, hook and crook, that patchwork of Obamacare had been jammed through the House and the Senate in a fashion that would not have mirrored any process we had ever seen before. They'd seen the time that the Senate had a filibuster-proof majority. And I remember going into Christmas Eve, the vote that was taking place over there on the 24th on Christmas Eve of December. And I remember when the Senate had the ability to delay that vote from 9 o'clock in the morning on Christmas Eve morning, December 24th, till 9 o'clock that night, which truly would have been in Christmas Eve. And I sent the message over there to my senator, and I said, please delay that vote as long as you can. Keep that thing delayed until the last possible minute. If they want to jam this country and give us a Christmas present of Obamacare so badly that they will sit there on Christmas Eve, keep them there then and let them miss Christmas with their families because the flights will be gone out of Dulles by then. That's what I asked that had happened. There was a negotiation that took place, allowed an agreement from Republicans that there'd be a couple of votes in January that they wanted on some taxes or something of that nature. So they had a vote at 9 o'clock in the morning, December 24th, that allowed for Obamacare to move ahead one more time. And then I wrote back and I said, what do we do now, to my senator? And his answer was, pray, and pray for a Republican victory in the United States Senate race in Massachusetts, the special election because of the passing of Senator Teddy Kennedy. None of us thought on December 24th that year that the following January 18th or 19th, that's very close to the election date, that Scott Brown would be elected as a United States Senator out of Massachusetts. That is what happened. That was the people in Massachusetts rising up and saying, we don't want Obamacare. We reject Obamacare. We'll even go so far as that entirely blue state of Massachusetts that had a delegation of 8 members of Congress, every single one of them a Democrat, and none of them known as conservative Democrats by the measure that I know. That's Massachusetts, and they sent us Scott Brown. And they're the ones that had the most example with something that looked like a preview, perhaps, of Obamacare. So who knew more than the Bay Staters about this? Who had the most loaded politics that should have been electing a Democrat in that election? No, they said, we don't want to see anything that looks like Obamacare, and we're going to send you a young, fresh Republican whose job it is to help kill Obamacare. And he came here and began to engage in that effort and was significant in his role. And my hat's off to former Senator Scott Brown. But in the end, legislative shenanigans defeated even the voters in Massachusetts' will, and they put legislation through back over from the Senate under what process they call reconciliation. They carved out some, put it into the reconciliation process to avoid the filibuster because they no longer had a filibuster-proof majority. The people had spoken, and then the legislative shenanigans began. While that was going on, there was a drama here in the House. Now, that takes us to March of that year. And the drama in the House was that there were the Stupak dozen who said, I'm not going to vote for an Obamacare piece of legislation that will fund abortion. And so the President made an offer, this is what's reported in the news at least, Mr. Speaker, that he would write an executive order that would nullify the Stupak amendment or nullify the ban on funding abortion. And that promise was made by the President before Obamacare was passed in order to get the votes to get Obamacare to pass here on the floor of the House of Representatives. Now think of that. The President of the United States, a former adjunct professor of law at the University, professor of constitutional law at the University of Chicago, made a promise to a Democrat congressman from Michigan who presumably controlled 12 votes of the unnamed Stupak dozen, who were anonymous, oddly, that it's hard to think you're going to control votes if nobody knows who they are. But in any case, the President making a promise that he would sign an executive order that would nullify some of the language that's in the law. And Congressman Stupak took that promise, and the former adjunct constitutional law professor, President Obama, made a promise that said that the President thought that he could amend law immediately after, actually after he signed it into law. Now, what constitutional professor would take a position like that? I dig this up for a little bit, Mr. Speaker, because I want people to understand this piece of Obamacare legislation is not the will of the people. It never was the will of the people. It's a product of hook and crook and legislative shenanigan. It's done against the will of the people. And furthermore, Thomas Jefferson, whom both parties revere, once said, large initiatives should not be advanced on slender majorities. Large initiatives need to be bipartisan initiatives, not completely 100% partisan initiatives, which Obamacare is. And the slender majority that Thomas Jefferson was talking about was a slender majority that he previewed at least, or presumed to be, a bipartisan majority. If Jefferson had been talking about a partisan majority, it would have been very clear, in my opinion, what he would have said. He would have said, large initiatives should never be advanced on partisan majorities. That's what happened with Obamacare. The largest initiative that has been jammed down the throats of the American people in its entire history is Obamacare, advanced on a purely partisan majority by utilization of legislative shenanigan and hook and crook. That's what got us to this point. And people wonder, why don't you just throw up your hands? Why don't you accept reality? Obamacare is the law of the land. Let it be. Fund it. Because the people have spoken. Well, the people had spoken. They spoke when they elected Scott Brown. And in the aftermath of the passage of Obamacare in March, about March 20th or 21st of 2010, the people spoke again that following November. And I remember when Obamacare passed in the night, and I had been battling this thing for days, and I went home about 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe a little later than that, but it was when the business wound down here in the House, Mr. Speaker. And I went home and I thought, I'm going to lay down and I'm going to sleep the sleep of the exhausted, and I'm going to get completely rested up, and I'm going to wake up in the morning, and then I'm going to put a plan together on what we do now. because I knew that the bill was messaged to the White House, and I knew the President was salivating to sign it. Well, he did that within about 48 hours. I woke up, though, in about 2.5 hours because the wheels were turning, and I couldn't take it any longer, and I drafted the language to repeal Obamacare and had that formal request to get that bill handed back to me by the draft people we have here as when the door opened at 9 o'clock that morning. And we've been doing battle with Obamacare ever since. Not only me. A gentlelady from Minnesota that was down here and led an hour special order earlier today has been standing in there and ran for president on the issue, Michelle Bachmann. And no one wondered what she would do if she were elected president. She'd have repealed Obamacare. Louis Gohmert has been putting hour after hour here on the floor and around this country doing battle with Obamacare. The list of people that deserve credit for stepping up to this fight is long. And it isn't exclusive here in the House, Mr. Speaker. It certainly includes a group of stalwarts in the Senate, led in this latest episode by Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, who stood on the floor for more than 21 hours and delivered a whole series of arguments against Obamacare. But I'll say here's the argument that is at the center of Obamacare, Mr. Speaker, and it is this. Obamacare is, by my opinion, an unconstitutional takings of God-given American liberty. It takes away our right to manage our health. The most sovereign thing that we have as the American people is our soul. And our soul, the eternal nature of our soul, is controlled by God and our will. This federal government hasn't figured out how to nationalize our soul. But the second most sovereign thing we have is our bodies, our health, our skin, and everything inside it. It's the second most sovereign thing that we have. And the federal government under Obamacare has figured out how to nationalize our skin and everything inside it. A federal government takeover of the management of our health, where under Obamacare, if you walk into a clinic, if you walk into an emergency room, if you apply for government-approved insurance under whatever means it might emerge, when no one really can tell us at this point, the government decides whether you get the insurance, the government decides whether you get a subsidy for the premium, the government decides what kind of research gets done, what kind of treatment one gets. The government decides if you're worth the hip replacement or the knee replacement, or whether you get just painkillers for as long as you can live with a broken hip. The government decides that, not us any longer. Now, we understand that, those of us that have a little bit of gray hair, or maybe have lost some. We understand that, but do the children in our grade schools and in our nurseries today understand that? Mr. Speaker, we know that answer is no. They don't understand that. When these children grow up and they get out of school and they step into adulthood and they've already been brought up in a system of Obamacare that makes these decisions for them, what happens to their dreams? What happens to their aspirations? What happens to their ability to think big? What happens to their ability to manage their life? The institutional memory of the culture and civilization will disappear that remembers the glorious time when we could choose our doctor, when the market demand created the insurance policies that suit us, the consumers, when we could shop from doctor to doctor, from clinic to clinic, when we could say, but you know, I want this care for my mother this badly that I think even though that she is 85, she needs a hip replacement because I don't want to see her die in a wheelchair. That's a different world than that we have today, and I'd be happy to yield to the Speaker.
Suspend. The Chair will receive a message.